Welcome, where we take complex events, systems, or stacks of information and distill them down to the critical knowledge you need to be thoroughly informed.
Today, we are undertaking a necessary and a very detailed analysis of a tragedy that deeply affected the global consciousness back in June of 2023. We're talking about the catastrophic loss of the OceanGate submersible Titan.
And this subject carries immense gravity. It involves the profound loss of 5 lives, so we want to be clear that we approach this material with the utmost respect for the victims and their families.
Absolute.
Our mission here is to conduct a really thorough analysis of the source material that you, our listener, provided. We're going to cover the vessel's controversial background, the experimental and frankly flawed design choices, the precise timeline of that final mission, and the comprehensive and quite damning findings from the international investigations that followed.
And we really have to emphasize this from the very beginning. The conclusions that were drawn by the investigating bodies, we're talking about the U.S. Coast Guard, the NTSB, Canadian authorities, they all point toward a systemic, fundamental breakdown.
So this wasn't just bad luck.
Not at all. This was not simply a consequence of operating in an inherently dangerous environment. It was, and the reports are very clear on this, a documented and systematic failure to adhere to established, essential safety standards. And that led directly to a disaster that was, in the investigators' final words, entirely preventable.
Before we get into the chronology and the technical details, let's just take a moment to acknowledge the 5 individuals who perished on that vessel. There was Stockton Rush, the American CEO of OceanGate, who was also piloting the submersible on this mission.
There was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a revered 77-year-old French deep-sea explorer. I mean, this man was one of the world's foremost Titanic experts. He had completed dozens of successful visits to the wreck before this.
Also on board was Hamish Harding, a 58-year-old British businessman, aviator, and a well-known world adventurer who held multiple Guinness World Records.
And finally, Shahzada Dawood, a 48-year-old Pakistani-British businessman and philanthropist, along with his son, Sulman Dawood, who was just 19 years old, a student, and the youngest person aboard.
It's through the lens of that immense human loss that we really have to analyze the decisions, the warnings, and, the final sequence of events that led to the failure of the Titan. Okay, so let's unpack the foundational business context of OceanGate. What was their operating model? The company was co-founded back in 2009 by Stockton Rush and Guillermo Sonline, based out of Everett, Washington.
Right. And their main focus, their business model, was transporting paying customers to deep-sea shipwreck sites. They formally called these customers mission specialists, which gave it this, air of scientific endeavor.
Yeah.
But it was, at its core, a unique and very expensive tourism experience.
What's fascinating here is that Rush wasn't just an engineer. He was also a businessman who was really acutely aware of media optics and marketability.
Very much so. He understood the undeniable economic value of what you might call celebrity wrecks. He stated quite publicly in interviews that getting access to the Titanic was absolutely essential for media attention, for attracting those high-paying clients.
He called it the one wreck that everyone knows.
He did. He knew that if you survey people anywhere in the world and ask them to name something deep underwater, the Titanic is always at the top of the list, right alongside, sharks or whales. That massive cultural recognition was really the cornerstone of OceanGate's entire commercial model.
And the wreck itself, it isn't just famous. It's in one of the most remote and challenging environments on the entire planet.
Absolutely. Geographically, the Titanic lies about 320 nautical miles, which is around 590 kilometers off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland.
But the distance isn't the real problem, is it? It's the depth.
Exactly. The real challenge is the depth. We are talking about 3,810 meters down. That's about 12,500 feet.
Can you put that into perspective for us? 12,500 feet.
Well, think of it this way. That is significantly deeper than the Grand Canyon is deep. It's an extremely exclusive club. I mean, by 2012, only about 140 people had ever visited the site. That just underscores how rare and logistically difficult this journey is.
So for OceanGate's clients, what did it take to join this club? The financial commitment was staggering.
It was. The customers, those mission specialists, they paid a fee of $250,000 per person for the privilege.
Wow.
And that fee covered the entire 8-day expedition. So that included the sailing time, which was about 2 days each way on the support ship, the MV Polar Prince, and then spending about 5 days moored over the wreck site just waiting for a dive window.
And the dive itself wasn't quick?
No, it was an 8-hour ordeal. A full round trip took about 8 hours, with the descent phase alone typically taking around 2 full hours as the Titan slowly made its way down to the abyssal plain.
It was designed for 5 people, right? The pilot, a guide, and 3 passengers.
Correct. Usually Rush is the pilot, an expert like Paul-Henri Nargeolet, and then 3 paying customers. And a key logistical detail that became significant later is that once everyone was inside, the forward hatch was bolted shut with 17 bolts. And it could only be opened from the outside.
No way to get out from the inside.
None. There was no internal mechanism for the occupants to exit.
It's also important to establish the context of the Titan's operational history leading up to this. The implosion happened during what they called Mission 5 of the 2023 season.
Right, but the sources are clear that the vessel had a history of operational issues, even just that year. None of the 4 earlier missions in 2023 had actually made it to the wreck.
Why not?
It was a combination of things. Persistent rough weather, which is common in the North Atlantic, but also significant technical malfunctions. So this highlights a pattern of, logistical difficulty and technical unreliability that came way before the catastrophic failure.
And we keep coming back to that operating environment because it dictates everything. A depth of 3,810 meters. That generates crushing, almost incomprehensible pressure.
It does. We're talking about over 330 standard atmospheres of pressure. That translates to roughly 4,800 pounds per square inch PSI.
Wait, 4,800 PSI. That's a number that's really difficult to visualize. Can you give us a sense of what that force is like?
Sure. Think of it this way. 4,800 PSI means that every single square inch of the Titan's hull was being subjected to a force equivalent to having a fully loaded, standard mid-sized SUV.
Okay.
Weighing about 4,800 pounds, balancing directly on a postage stamp. Now, imagine that force on every single postage stamp-sized section across the entire surface of the sub. It's an utterly unforgiving environment. Any minute structural flaw is magnified instantaneously into a catastrophic failure.
That's a staggering realization. And given that risk, the experimental nature of this whole venture was, in a way, legally acknowledged by OceanGate.
It was. We know from a former television producer who went on the expedition that the legal waiver you had to sign mentioned the word death 3 times on the very first page.
3 times?
3 times. This just underscores how transparent the company had to be about the experimental nature and the potentially fatal outcome, even if the severity of the design compromises wasn't, made clear to the public.
Okay, so moving from the financial and environmental context, let's turn to the machine itself, the Titan Submersible. It was absolutely central to the whole controversy in the investigation.
It was a 6.7-meter-long 5-person vessel, and the physical construction sounds robust on the surface. It was made from carbon fiber and titanium.
But it's that combination and how it was engineered that really forms the core of the investigation's findings. The pressure hull, the part meant to protect the occupants, was made of 2 thick titanium hemispheres, or end bells,
Right.
which were bonded to a 2.4-meter-long central cylinder made of carbon fiber composites.
Exactly. And the use of carbon fiber for a deep-sea pressure vessel is where OceanGate fundamentally broke from almost all established engineering protocols. For decades, the industry standard has been titanium or steel or certain high-grade ceramics.
And there's a good reason for that, I assume.
A very simple reason. Materials used in the deep sea have to withstand compression, and they must maintain their integrity under what's called cyclic loading. That's being repeatedly squeezed and released on every single dive.
And carbon fiber is notoriously bad at handling that kind of repeated compression fatigue, isn't it?
It is. Unlike titanium, which will deform but generally holds its strength, carbon fiber is incredibly strong in tension when you pull it apart. That's why it's great for airplanes. But it has very poor resistance to compression. And more dangerously, under repeated cycles of immense pressure, the microscopic matrix of the composite hull accumulates tiny flaws, cracks, and it absorbs water. This leads to a phenomenon called progressive failure. It gets just a little bit weaker on every single dive, which makes predicting the point of catastrophic failure almost impossible using standard methods.
And on top of that, you have the issue of bonding titanium directly to the carbon fiber. You have 2 totally different materials with different properties.
And more importantly, different coefficients of thermal expansion. That is a critical point.
Meaning they shrink and expand at different rates.
Precisely. Every time the sub went down into the freezing depths, the titanium and the carbon fiber would contract at different rates. This continuous expansion and contraction put immense, repeated shear stress right on the adhesive on the bond line between the 2 materials.
And over time,
This cyclical stress causes microscopic gaps, voids, and delaminations, where the layers of the composite literally peel apart. It's like the layers of plywood coming undone when they get wet and stressed. This process just accelerates the fatigue failure of the entire structure.
And beyond the basic material choice, there's the astonishing flaw with the vessel's viewport, the acrylic window. The source material is unequivocal here. That window, 380 millimeters in diameter, was non-standard and only certified to a maximum depth of 1,300 meters.
Wait, I have to stop you there. This is one of the most staggering facts to come out of all this. The Titanic is at 3,810 meters. The viewport, a literally critical component, was rated for only about 1/3 of the depth required.
A third.
Yes, this was a massive, acknowledged deviation from safety standards that engineers had explicitly warned OceanGate about years before the incident.
And we'll get more into those warnings later because they're central to this whole story. It speaks volumes about the entire philosophy of operation.
It does. And that questionable sourcing extended to the raw materials themselves. Rush publicly claimed he got the carbon fiber at a significant discount from Boeing because it was supposedly too old for use in airplanes.
Too old for airplanes, but okay for the deep sea.
That was the implication. Now, Boeing later denied having any records of this, but the very suggestion that critical hull material was acquired because it was discounted or too old for aerospace, in an environment far less hostile than 4,000 meters underwater, is incredibly alarming. It just reinforces this impression that cost savings were put ahead of rigorous material science.
Let's talk about the controls. This detail got a lot of media attention and, frankly, contributed to the perception of recklessness. The Titan was famously controlled using a modified Logitech F710 wireless game controller.
Yeah, the $30 video game controller.
Right.
And while, using commercial off-the-shelf components is a practice in some industries, the U.S. Navy uses Xbox controllers for submarine periscopes, the optics for a crewed vessel carrying high-paying civilian passengers into the absolute extreme deep. They were terrible.
It created this image of something being jerry-rigged, as one journalist put it. And the controller wasn't the only unconventional system. Navigation was entirely reliant on external inputs.
Correct. GPS signals can't penetrate the ocean depths, so the Titan relied completely on the support ship, the polar prints, to tell it where it was. The support ship would then send text messages to the sub, giving distances and directions for the pilot to follow. It's a very basic dependency that required constant communication, which, as we know, failed.
This brings us to the big picture on safety. How was OceanGate even allowed to operate a vessel like this without oversight?
It all comes down to operating in international waters. By doing so, they could bypass the rigorous safety regulations imposed by national agencies like the U.S. Coast Guard.
So no one was checking their work?
Critically, no. The vessel was not certified by any regulatory agency or any established third-party classification organization. For example, Lloyd's Register, one of the world's most prominent ship classification societies, explicitly refused to classify the vessel back in 2019.
And this wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate choice, part of Stockton Rush's stated philosophy.
Exactly. He openly argued that excessive safety protocols were bureaucratic obstacles that actively hindered commercial innovation.
His statements in hindsight are just exceptionally damning.
They are. In a 2022 interview, he made the extremely provocative assertion, and I'm quoting here, "At some point, safety just is pure waste. I mean, if you just want to be safe, don't get out of bed." He even admitted he'd broken some rules by combining carbon fiber and titanium, claiming he did it with logic and good engineering. This attitude created a corporate culture where established standards were seen as challenges to be overcome, not rules to be followed.
So to try and counter this obvious lack of third-party certification, OceanGate promoted its own proprietary safety mechanism, the real-time monitoring system, or RTM.
Right. This system used acoustic sensors and strain gauges along the hull to supposedly monitor structural integrity continuously. It promised early warning of a failure, theoretically giving the pilot time to abort the dive.
But it was fundamentally flawed, wasn't it?
Fundamentally. OceanGate was using composites, which fail internally through delamination and matrix cracking before any external sign appears. The RTM system, using acoustic sensors, was designed to listen for sharp, immediate stress events, like a loud crack or a metal part rupturing.
But the reality of how composites fail is much quieter, more insidious.
Precisely. Expert testimony in the investigation confirmed that the RTM system would only really indicate when a component was about to fail, often just milliseconds before an implosion. It could not detect the pre-existing silent internal flaws like voids or delaminations that were building up in the carbon fiber. Those flaws only make a loud noise when they reach a terminal irreversible state.
So Rush was promoting a system that gave a warning signal that would arrive milliseconds too late for anyone to do anything about it.
It was a false promise of safety. To detect those internal flaws, the industry standard is non-destructive testing, or NDT, using things like ultrasonic scans. The sources reveal OceanGate actively resisted doing NDT on the hull, arguing it was too difficult or expensive. So they were knowingly sending people down in a vessel whose internal structural integrity was completely unverified.
Here's where the story gets so frustrating. The investigation sources show that this implosion was not a surprise to the deep-sea engineering community. OceanGate had received multiple, documented, and often graphic warnings.
Yes. The most prominent internal example is David Lockridge, who was OceanGate's director of marine operations. As early as 2018, he documented serious safety concerns. He specifically urged the company to get third-party certification from a major body like the American Bureau of Shipping.
He argued it was just reckless to operate without it.
He did. And he zeroed in on the most vulnerable points. He highlighted that non-standard acrylic viewport rated for only 1,300 meters, arguing that the company was putting passengers in extreme danger by taking it down to 4,000.
And his other big objection was about the hull itself and the flawed RTM system.
Right. Lockridge insisted they had to conduct proper non-destructive testing on the hull to check for internal flaws. He alleged that management, specifically Rush, refused, arguing that a scan for those flaws couldn't be reliably done because the hull was just too thick.
Wait, so the internal safety director is telling them they need to look for flaws, and their response is, essentially, we can't because the hull is too thick to see through. They were operating blind.
That is precisely the implication from the court documents. Lockridge was then terminated. OceanGate sued him for breaching confidentiality, but he countersued as a whistleblower, arguing he was wrongfully terminated for raising these critical safety issues.
So these allegations were a matter of public record years before the tragedy.
Yes. The parties settled out of court, but the concerns, the viewport, the lack of NDT, the flawed design, they were all out there.
And the warnings weren't just internal. In March 2018, Mark Negley, a Boeing engineer involved in preliminary design consulting, sent a direct, chilling email to Stockton Rush.
This email is incredible. Negley had analyzed the hull's projected strain response under pressure. He warned Rush of a high risk of a significant failure at or before you reach 4,000 meters.
And he didn't mince words.
Not at all. To underscore the severity, he graphically included a skull and crossbones icon on the strain graph right at that critical depth. I mean, that is an unmistakable warning that should have stopped the entire program in its tracks.
And the broader professional community tried to intervene as well.
They did. Also in 2018, the Marine Technology Society, this is a huge group of submarine experts, engineers, oceanographers, they drafted a letter to Rush expressing unanimous concern. They wrote that OceanGate's current experimental approach could result in negative outcomes, from minor to catastrophic.
They were also critical of the company's misleading marketing, weren't they?
Yes. The letter specifically noted that OceanGate was publicly claiming the Titan would meet or exceed DNV safety standards, even though the company had no plans to actually pursue DNV certification. They were using the appearance of safety standards without going through the actual process.
And Rush's response to all this?
His response perfectly encapsulates the toxic culture the Coast Guard later cited. He dismissed the industry warnings as a protectionist racket. He told one major specialist, Rob McCallum, that he was tired of industry players who try to use a safety argument to stop innovation.
And McCallum's reply to Rush is one of the most powerful and prophetic details in the whole story.
It is. He warned Rush that he was dangerously mirroring that famous catch cry, "She is unsinkable."
The parallel to the original Titanic disaster is almost too painful to contemplate. Professionals saw this coming years in advance.
They did. And we have physical evidence the hull was failing long before the final dive. The source material shows that in 2021, OceanGate had to build a whole new hull because the previous one had cracked after only 50 dives.
And only 3 of those dives even made it to the full depth.
Right. The rapid failure of that first hull was a massive, expensive warning sign. But instead of halting and redesigning, Rush reportedly told engineers to salvage and reuse the expensive titanium domes and rings from the crack hull and just bond them to the new one.
Which could have weakened the new joint from day one.
Exactly. And then came the most catastrophic indicator of all, Dive 80, in July 2022.
This is a crucial piece of evidence.
It's perhaps the most significant. During that mission, Passengers on the Titan reported hearing an incredibly loud acoustic event during the ascent. Data from the RTM system itself confirmed an extreme, unmistakable spike on one of the sensors.
So what was that loud bang?
The Coast Guard investigation later concluded that the loud acoustic event on Dive 80 was the carbon fiber hull delaminating. A layer had failed. This failure permanently altered the structural response of the hull. In engineering terms, the vessel had sustained irreversible terminal damage.
So every dive after that.
The BBC later reported that every dive the Titan took after that specific event was, scientifically speaking, a disaster waiting to happen. The hull was already compromised beyond repair. They were knowingly operating a ticking time bomb.
Let's trace the final chilling steps of the Titan's last mission, Mission 5. The expedition departed from St. John's, Newfoundland on June 16, 2023, aboard the support vessel, the MV Polar Prince.
They arrived at the wreck site on the morning of June 18th. Around 8:30 a.m. Newfoundland Daylight Time, the 5 occupants boarded, the hatch was bolted shut, and the descent began at 8:55 a.m.
For the first hour and a half, everything seemed normal. The Titan communicated with the Polar Prince by text message about every 15 minutes, plus a routine data ping was sent automatically every 5 to 10 seconds.
Right. The communication record is very tight near the end.
Right.
At a depth of 2,274 meters, just over halfway down, they sent a text reading, "All good here."
And then as they got closer to the bottom, we get the final human-written text.
Yes. It was received at 10:47.27 a.m. at a depth of about 3,341 meters, and the message simply read, "Drop 2 rights."
Drop 2 weights.
And the absolute final data ping was received just 6 seconds later at 10:47.33 a.m. Then total instantaneous silence. No distress call, no aborted descent signal, nothing.
That final text message, dropped 2 wreckers, is so revealing because it's so routine.
It is. Testimony from an OceanGate contractor on the Polar Prince provided crucial context. He explained that dropping 2 weights, about 70 pounds of ballast, was a standard maneuver to adjust buoyancy when approaching the seabed.
To go from sinking to hovering.
Exactly. This strongly suggests the crew was engaged in a routine operational task. They were not aware of any immediate or critical emergency moments before contact was lost. It refutes that early speculation that they detected damage and were trying to make an emergency ascent.
The reality of the implosion confirms that lack of awareness. A highly specialized U.S. Navy acoustic detection system designed to monitor military submarines picked up a signal consistent with a catastrophic implosion just 17 minutes after that final ping.
The implosion occurred at 11:04 a.m., less than 2 hours into the dive. The reason the signal was initially flagged as an anomaly was because military hydrophones are trained on large, metal-hulled submarines. The small composite-hulled Titan produced a different, but still definitive, acoustic signature of collapse.
Given that immense pressure, 4,800 psi, what does the science tell us about the speed of that failure? Could they have known what was happening?
All the analysis confirms this was an instantaneous event. When the pressure chamber failed at that depth, the external pressure slammed the hull inward at an incredible velocity. The collapse likely took only a few milliseconds, which is significantly faster than the human nervous system can even process sensory input.
So the victims would have died instantaneously before they could even register that something was wrong.
That is the grim but verified conclusion. Because of the speed of the failure, there would have been no time for the occupants to experience pain or fear or even realize a breach was occurring. And that's a necessary detail to grasp when we reflect on the human cost of this.
Following the realization that the Titan was missing, a massive international search effort was mobilized. The world watched this intense, highly publicized race against time.
The logistical scale was just unprecedented for a civilian submersible loss. It was coordinated by a unified command with the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Navy, and the Canadian Coast Guard. And the difficulty was immense, searching both the surface and the abyssal depths at the same time in such a remote location.
And assets were pouring in from multiple nations. Military aircraft like the C-130 Hercules and P-8 Poseidon were dropping sonar buoys to listen for the vessel.
Right, and at the same time, specialized commercial and research vessels with high-tech remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, were being rushed to the site.
The clock was the dominant factor driving all this urgency.
It was. The submersible carried a life support supply of breathable air for a maximum of 96 hours. If the Titan had somehow remained intact but was stranded on the seabed, that air supply would have expired on the morning of Thursday, June 22nd.
And during the search, there was that brief period of agonizing false hope that dominated the headlines, the underwater banging noises.
Yes. Canadian aircraft sonar picked up these unexplained noises, which temporarily shifted the entire focus of the search.
Yeah.
Many believed it was the occupants signaling their location.
That wasn't the case.
Sadly, no. The Coast Guard later stated the noises were apparently unrelated to the sub. They were likely biological in origin or man-made noises from the other vessels on the surface. They consumed crucial search time, but didn't lead anywhere.
The actual breakthrough, the devastating confirmation, came on June 22nd. A debris field was located by the Odysseus 6K ROV from Pelagic Research Services.
Right, and the location was significant. The wreckage was scattered about 500 meters northeast of the Titanic's bow. The fact that the debris was in a specific contained area confirmed the conclusion of a sudden, catastrophic implosion. If it had failed gradually or sprung a leak, it would have been found in one piece, potentially miles away.
What specific debris was found that confirmed the nature of the failure?
The wreckage confirmed the total destruction of the pressure vessel. They found external components like the tail cone and, critically, the forward and aft titanium end bells, the caps that sealed the chamber.
But not the carbon fiber part.
The titanium components were often found relatively intact, but the carbon fiber cylinder they were bonded to had been vaporized or fragmented beyond recognition by the immense pressure wave.
Rear Admiral John Mauger of the U.S. Coast Guard held a press conference that day and confirmed the conclusion. The findings were consistent with a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber.
Subsequent recovery operations retrieved the debris and presumed human remains. They were returned to St. John's and then transported to the U.S. for investigation. We know the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory later positively identified the DNA profiles of all 5 victims, confirming the complete loss of life.
The catastrophic nature of this failure, combined with that long list of prior warnings, immediately triggered multiple, complex, formal investigations.
Yes, launched by the U.S. Coast Guard as the lead agency, the NTSB, the Transportation Safety Board in Canada, and with involvement from French and UK authorities because of the victims' nationalities. The USCG formally declared it a major marine casualty.
And the core of the findings came out of the USCG's public hearings in 2024.
Right, the Marine Board of Investigation, or MBI, hearings. They provided detailed testimony from people once inside OceanGate, including the whistleblower David Lockridge and external experts.
And what was the overriding theme from all that testimony?
It was consistent. The conscious decision by OceanGate leadership, by Stockton Rush and I, to prioritize aggressive cost savings and speed over fundamental safety. The testimony revealed his refusal to listen to repeated, credible warnings, and evidence showed records of over 100 equipment issues in the 2 years leading up to the final dive, a clear pattern of neglected maintenance.
And the technical analysis of the wreckage itself was devastating.
It was. The NTSB confirmed critical, inherent flaws in the hull. They found conclusive evidence of delamination, variability in adhesive thickness at the joints, visible voids, and porosity within the carbon fiber.
And they found evidence of what looked like repair work or flawed manufacturing from the start, right?
Yes. The NTSB analysis revealed wrinkles in the hull layers that had been machined away and then layered over with more carbon fiber and adhesive. These areas were inherently weaker and almost certainly were the prime points where the failure began under compression.
This ties back directly to that acoustic event during Dive 80 in 2022.
Exactly. The investigation provided the definitive link. That extreme spike recorded by the acoustic sensors on Dive 80 was confirmed to be the carbon fiber delaminating. That event fundamentally and permanently compromised the hull. The fact that they kept diving after that shows the complete failure of OceanGate's safety culture.
The final official word came in August 2025 when the USCG released its comprehensive results of investigation report. The conclusion was unequivocal.
It was. The accident was declared preventable. The report laid the blame squarely on OceanGate and its leadership, citing a multitude of failures. Critically flawed safety practices, the reckless use of an uncertified hull, the failure to investigate prior anomalies like Dive 80, and neglected maintenance.
The report also went into the corporate culture.
It did. It stated that OceanGate fostered a toxic internal environment that actively suppressed and punished employees who voiced safety concerns, explicitly referencing the wrongful termination of David Lockridge.
And the report specifically noted that Stockton Rush, as both CEO and pilot, exhibited negligence.
Yes, by consciously choosing to operate outside of all established industry norms despite repeated, detailed warnings. Criminal charges were precluded by his death, but the investigation established profound operational negligence.
Beyond the regulatory failures, the sources also highlight the significant financial burden this placed on the public. The massive search operation cost taxpayers millions.
Yes, Initial estimates for the U.S. Coast Guard alone were around 1.2 million U.S. dollars, not including the subsequent recovery or the Navy's involvement. The Canadian contribution was also substantial, at least 3 million Canadian dollars for just one aircraft deployment.
And it's important to remember that the Coast Guard is generally prohibited from seeking reimbursement for search and rescue, so the public absorbed the cost of rescuing an uncertified private tourism venture. This tragedy also sparked a major global conversation about the disparity in attention and resource allocation during disasters. The sheer scale of the media coverage and rescue efforts for the 5 people on the Titan was sharply contrasted with the simultaneous Messina migrant boat disaster.
Yes, that happened just days earlier and involved hundreds of presumed fatalities, yet it received comparatively minimal resources or media attention. The comparison, though uncomfortable, really highlighted the profound socioeconomic divides in how tragedy is reported and how resources are prioritized internationally.
And finally, we have to include the critique from those most familiar with the Titanic site, like James Cameron.
Right. The director, who has personally visited the wreck 33 times in certified subs, offered a powerful analysis. He was highly critical of the core design choice, the carbon fiber hull. He stated unequivocally that carbon fiber has no strength in compression and is fundamentally the wrong material for a deep-sea pressure vessel.
He pointed to its vulnerability to water ingress and fatigue failure over time.
And he drew that powerful, almost unbelievable historical parallel. He said he was struck by the similarity between the Titan implosion and the original 1912 Titanic sinking, arguing both were preventable and caused by leadership deliberately ignoring explicit safety warnings.
His perspective as a veteran of deep-sea exploration just reinforces the investigative findings perfectly.
It does. Safe operation in that environment demands adherence to time-tested materials and established third-party standards, precisely the protocols that Stockton Rush explicitly chose to bypass.
So ultimately, the complete analysis of this tragedy, when you synthesize all the source material, it rests on 2 main, critically interconnected pillars.
It does. First, you have the inherent physical instability and the total lack of robust testing of that experimental composite design, especially a hull that had already shown documented signs of terminal damage after dive 80.
And second, the tragedy was rooted in the conscious, deliberate decision by OceanGate leadership to operate entirely outside established industry regulation, actively dismissing and often punishing expert warnings in favor of a misguided philosophy that dangerously viewed essential safety procedures as pure waste.
The confluence of a flawed material choice and a negligent corporate culture created a perfect and lethal storm 4 kilometers beneath the waves.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The exhaustive knowledge from these sources leads us to a crucial conceptual tension. The tragedy forces us to confront the boundary between the drive for commercial innovation, which Rush championed, and the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of strict, tested, and established safety standards when human lives are involved.
Especially when operating in the most hostile, unforgiving environments on the planet.
The question we're left with is profound. When does the pursuit of a world first, or the drive for exploration, or the commercial desire for unique tourism cross the line from calculated risk into reckless, documented negligence?
The refusal to spend money on NDT scanning, the insistence on reusing damaged components, the dismissal of skull and crossbones warnings. These actions define the cost of that failure.
Thank you for joining us for this extensive exploration of the sources surrounding the Titan tragedy.
We appreciate you trusting us with this complex and sobering material.
Thanks for listening.